So everybody should see the slides very well now. My name is Kristian. I'm the founder of Uitrial. We're a company that does a lot of qualitative testing for, well, we have different solutions and products, primarily for the gaming industry, so game development, mobile games. And it's very, um, you know, industry focused on UX because it's a very competitive market. The companies there, they really want to do everything they possibly can at the lowest cost and at the fastest time frames to improve their product and stand out from their competition at every step. So there is quite a lot of things that I've noticed over several years working in this field, and I wanted to share these with you. And this is intended more of like a QA talk, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to get questions in real time or if there will be any. But it's really aimed at answering some questions from the audience about processes and how individuals from the audience go about doing their testing. This really guides the talk to a certain extent. But anyway, I will start. And the aim of this talk is pretty much to give a basic overview of what it is that's stopping companies from performing very well in their product development, and the barriers there are to it, and how this can be actually overcome, and why this is not really a major thing, and pretty much anybody can start improving their product at any time, even though it seems like such a daunting task. So designers primarily, or producers, depending on the market and what somebody's doing, they have a triangle of factors that they can influence and that come together in their own kind of professional image of a professional working on a particular product. So most have experience and expertise. That's how you're hired, right? That's how you're put into a position. That's how you're put into lead a certain product or develop a new product or an update. But that's really old way of approaching things, and it only gets us so far. Information is something that is possible to obtain only in the present context. So it's not something you can take with you most of the time from your other previous place of work or another industry. It's very context specific. Some markets or industries have a more pronounced effect of this. Information is more important, for example, in more competitive markets where everybody's looking for that, than in less competitive markets like some very cutting edge technology that's coming out and there really isn't anybody trying to do the same thing. So you have a lot of opportunity to actually make a product, and even if the UX is not so good, it still performs well. But information is actually what I mean by information here is the data and the information from the audience on what is required from the product and how is the product perceived by the audience. This is the element that is obtained usually not straightforwardly through experience or expertise or your hard skills or something like that. It's obtained from the fact that you do a certain method or you have a certain process set up with your audience, with your users, perhaps even your target leads that you run ads to. And there are several ways to obtain this information to make a better product, to guide your development, to get insights. But a lot of designers still, even though they understand that they need this information, they oftentimes find themselves lost. And this is actually a vicious kind of, I would say, a vicious cycle of basically, coming to I don't know how to say it. It's a barrier of some sort, and then you face it, you try to experiment with it, nothing really works out, and then you sort of fall back to just relying on your experience, reading something on the internet, maybe conducting some studies and stuff like that, looking at your competitors and working with that. So the primary question here for the audience would be, and it would be great if some people could actually put some questions together and send them while I'm talking here. But most of you would actually answer that you lack actionable information when you develop your product. Because of that, you feel lost and you really cannot understand what process am I supposed to set up here to actually not feel lost, to be able to get a product, to obtain the goals that are set to it, to have the audience actually respond positively from the start. This leads to a problem, and the problem it's kind of like an organizational problem. So this also leads to responsibility. So when the production team is working on a product and they really can't, get enough insights to build great UX for the product, to actually set it out in a way that provides most value to its primary user target, this leads to debt, as in debt similar to technical debt that developers accrue when they develop a product very fast and then they leave a lot unpolished code, and then they have to return to it, and then they have to refactor all of that stuff, and they have to remember that they have a lot of time set up in the future that they will dedicate to refactoring. Similar here, there is debt collected, and it's because there is an ignorance for the need of information. And as more time passes, more is invested, and there are more needs of things that have to be changed each time. So with each update that you go with a unpolished process, with a method that does not involve information from your audience, what you actually do is you accrue debt that basically becomes bigger and bigger exponentially each time, and suddenly there are no changes that you can do to a product other than basically replace it or maybe rework it or have more people in your team working on it. This is similar to if we think about startups have this process where they iterate, and by that they get information. So they release their first version, they see how it performs. Usually it doesn't perform well because they don't know what the market wants. They don't have really a good go-to market strategy, and that fails, and then they iterate again and again and again. Obviously not everybody can do this because not each company is a startup, and a lot of products have been there for a long time and require work. So the question is, how do we simulate these iterations that happen in startups to avoid this debt, to have good information, to build great products, to impress your users? So designers and producers, they start to look into things that are quantitative for this, from my experience. So they go into, they subscribe to services, like Smart Look or, various other analytics services out there that show you the product performance from a quantitative perspective. How many users went into a certain page, and then another page, what were the sequences of their interactions, where they churned, where they didn't, where they stayed most, and stuff like that. But a lot of them actually ignored qualitative. And this is a big issue because qualitative data is actually significantly more impactful on product development than, it's like, it's very impactful. I don't know how to actually stress this enough, because a lot of producers and designers, they just stick to quantitative. And what they get up with, they just get quantitative data, which is super hard to attribute. So it's really hard to understand. So they have these cohorts of users, and then some of them are performing well, some of them are not, some of them have these needs, and some of them churn on this page or not. So you get all of this data, right? So obviously you understand the symptoms of what's wrong with each segment of your product, of its functionality. But it's really hard to attribute to what these symptoms actually lead. What is the underlying cause? What is the value that users are missing? Who are those users? It's really hard with quantitative. And at this point, a lot of the product designers, they just stop. They just think, okay, this is good enough. I've done my job. I don't know, marketing department should provide better leads or do better targeting or stuff like that. So they start to outsource the responsibility to the organization. And then the organization also kind of outsources this problem throughout itself. This is what usually happens in most companies, especially startups, and those that are not too experienced in how to build a product. And that is because qualitative is like a step forward. Qualitative research and everything you need to do for that, it's a big step. And it's a big step not everybody is willing to take. And somebody has to take responsibility for that. And somebody has to have the incentive to do that as well. And sometimes it's just too much, but actually it's a lot easier and sometimes even more easier than setting up quantitative systems. So this problem remains. To symbolize that this is a big step, and why this problem remains, it's really easy to look at this graph. For example, here, majority of companies throughout the world that participated in various studies and surveys say they're not happy with their UX research process. So something is not working right. But the upsides are really, really huge. So they can, if they set up a great product, if they position it well, if they have the right audience coming to it, they can obviously win the market over, and they can sell their product and get a lot of revenues. So there's this huge gap, like, everybody's having a problem, and then there's this upside, but how do we get from this problem to the upside? And a lot of people that I've interviewed and a lot of companies simply make baby steps which are really unstructured or chaotic, and they don't really have a process set up. And then the organizational head or like the bosses, they really don't want to finance all of that or invest into that much. So what happens is that basically this gap remains. And all of the attempts that are made are just there to actually solidify the stance of the company that this is unnecessary, this is not good enough, this is not structured enough. And there are some ways that you can really start to build a method that's a process that can avoid this. And you can actually show impact and opportunity to your management even at the start, so they can appreciate the possibilities and the upsides that can be taken. So this is another thing, right? Problems for designers or, again, producers, if we're talking about gaming, when they start to speak about qualitative data. So they want to find out more about their users, and they want to know more information that way to build better products for them, to drive more value. Basically what anybody would want to do in their position. But they also have individual problems like, they don't have enough free time. They have a lot of tasks. They have this technical debt, the designer debt or whatever, we might call it whatever we want. And there's too much overhead to set up a qualitative research, center or facility or whatever you might call it. There is a lack of understanding of what methods there are that can be used and which are most applicable in their particular case. Stakeholders don't want to accept because this is additional investment. Qualitative studies are usually quite expensive when compared to quantitative. And a lot of designers also, they trust their intuition. They think that they know what they're doing. Whereas actually in reality, there's always more information out there that can drive you to build better products than your experience or expertise or even your intuition, which is like an aggregate of those two. So what are the different modes of qualitative studies that we can understand before we try to actually go forward with that? A lot of companies stick to the in-person because remote has a very, despite its upsides, it has a very big problem of actually coordinating or coordinating the participants of a particular study to get feedback on the product or insights. A lot of people are, in different places of the world. It's hard to reach out to them. They don't really trust you. But this allows to actually build a very good representative of your audience. So if you're doing remote qualitative study, and that is, you're sitting in your office and you're looking for people from your user base, or maybe people from your target audience that can join you in a session, in a moderated or unmoderated session, it can result in a panel which is really representative of what you're looking for. In person, this is like super unrepresentative. I don't recommend this at all. I don't know why people and companies actually do in-person testing. This is like super old school stuff that's absolutely irrelevant in my opinion, unless you have like a cafe or something very localized. There's absolutely no reason to do in-person testing, and it's usually a lot more expensive. Of course, there are contexts where this is the only viable option, like, I don't know, doing UX for Ministry of Defense software or something like that, where you have to have very high control over who's actually participating. But this is a very localized and expensive route to go. And then there's also outsource, which is the other end of the spectrum, and unfortunately it's also very popular. So a lot of the companies that I worked and consulted with, and from my experience, they either do in person or they outsource. And they used to do outsource to consultancies, which charged a lot of money, and it's very non-transparent. So the outsourced company does a lot of research for you, but if you break the contract, suddenly you don't know the processes they actually use to get that information to you. Like, it's completely opaque. You don't retain any of the value you pay for. You just retain the information, the output, basically, which is really bad as well, I think, because all knowledge has to be retained in the company. That's what drives its value. That's what drives the value of the product eventually. So here is like, a brief overview with a hassle meter. I'd say actually this is the graphics are not really representative. They're really are all hard to set up. But I would say that, to start, there are many services right now available for, online software as a service programs and stuff like that. You have user testing, pretty much, I don't know, like dozens of services that can help you with this. I would suggest for, designers to start getting qualitative feedback on their products before they're actually being developed by going to some of these services and trying and experimenting, with very small budgets, and actually asking them questions. I just come to them and say, we have this product, we're working on it, it's not performing very well. We have these metrics and that. We want to find out, how to improve this, how to make it better for target audience. And a lot of them will consult you. Like, they will say, what type of method you should stick with, what kind of process you need to set up. But be wary, of course, because a lot of those, they want to upsell their services. They want to sell you something just like the consultants, so that you stick around. And they also want to retain you, so they won't tell you all the secrets. A question to the audience, because this is a very problematic section where, like, you have a lot of quantitative data, and then you're starting to understand that you can't really do anything with that to build a product. You go into this whole new area of expertise that you need to learn, which is the qualitative research and moderated testing. You go into in-person studies, or try to set some of those up. You go to outsource companies. Like, it would be great if some of you shared your personal experiences, because I know all of you have gone through this at some point during your career. And yeah, I would be glad to answer some of your questions. So moving on, solution, finding the right tool. Actually, this is like far from all. This is not the solution. This is like part of the solution. Finding the right tool is like the last thing you're supposed to do. But before that, it's really important inside your organization to understand, the barriers there are. And those barriers are usually split into two sections, so two groups. You have organizational barriers. So that's information that, bad processes that are convoluted, very bad communication between departments, stakeholder relations, and all that. And then you have individual, which is the universal need for status quo, reluctance from product designers and producers. Perhaps even you can put some individual stakeholders here as well. Those two segments are really important in my experience to overcome in order to, build a great product overall. But this also influences how you build the UX and the UI, and the quality of your product is directly correlated to this. Sometimes you will get lucky and you will get like a sales guy come in and be very good and sell you, a service that will provide qualitative insights to your company, to your product, and convince the stakeholders and share the processes with you and provide you reports on how they do it. But this is like super rare. I wouldn't depend on it. But in order for this to work, it's really important for designers to understand that they need information. And for that information to be obtained, they need to go from the bottom up and actually start to restructure their organization, be proactive, and basically promote this idea that this is the way to go forward. Because without this, you will spend a lot more money. You will do a lot more iterations. You will release products that users will not like. Eventually, this will either cause, your entire company crumbling on its debt, and to the users, I mean, and actually releasing a new product or starting a new thing again. Or you will overcome this challenge and you will build a great product, and you will have a process, and you will be super happy with yourself because you've set something up and it works, and you basically accomplished what you wanted with this particular company. Once those are dealt with, we actually come to the tool. And there are many tools out there. I would suggest, user testing is one of the standard. So let's say you have, the system set up where you have sprints, and at the end of each sprint, you make a build of your product, of your particular app, and you run that build on, your target audience. So you would go to user testing that build, and you would say, can we have, some users of this particular audience criteria go through and play this game or user app for an hour or two, and you will get some information there. There are, many alternatives, but remember that it's good to experiment, because doing everything in-house is a pain, and not even like the biggest companies out there can actually do this effectively, because this is an entirely self-contained area of expertise that a lot of companies are missing. It involves a lot of organizational skill on the part of people, and and the team that organizes these qualitative studies, even if they're remote. It even requires HR skills, like you have to work with hundreds of testers. Like, we in our company primarily for one of our products, we primarily provide value just because we're capable of communicating with hundreds of people from all around the world, in different time zones, and having them do the same thing to a certain quality. big companies that are some of the biggest in certain industries, they can't even do that. So doing everything in-house is a pain. I wouldn't suggest that. Finding a particular suite of instruments or a consultancy mixed with instruments, something transparent, something you can get experience from and actually retain it in your company is the way to go. Yeah, but it all really comes down to you. I mean, what are your goals right now? It would be very helpful if you could, sit down with your team and have a look at the questions that you have, like, we have this product, why is nobody using it? We have, this feature that is not being used. We have a particular audience, it's not performing well. When, we target them, they come to our app, they don't perform well. We have, I don't know, some features that are misused, or, just get a list of questions with your team and try to understand what is missing from those questions, how to get the information to actually answer those questions, and go from the most basic ones to the more complex ones, and you will start to understand where you're lacking. You're lacking in variety of information. You have very good quantitative product setup, but you're really lacking in understanding what each particular user or cohort is actually doing or thinking in a certain point of time. So you will understand the requirement to get those people and actually talking to them in a moderated test, for example, and try to understand your audience, something that a business development manager would do in a B2B business. But if you're a B2C, this would be like the only way to actually get feedback. Or you might set up surveys on your app, or email your users to answer several questions. By the way, that almost never works because people don't read their emails most of the time. But you will start to get answers, and once you get those answers, and you try to do those, you try to challenge every single point, you'll understand the actual instrumentals that you're missing. And with those instrumentals that you're missing and the anticipation of an upside, if you actually solve those questions, you can go to your management, you can go to your stakeholders, you can say, look, we're performing under the model. We can perform better than the model next month, maybe next quarter, if we do these certain actions, and we have these certain actions here outlined. And once you start to work in this very simple way, and you start to dedicate, a certain portion of your time each day to actually think about how your users really perceive your app or your product or whatever you're working on, what are their motivations, what are the underlying reasons for their behavior within your product, why do they churn at certain pages and all that. It will make work with the UX and the product in general significantly more easier. It sounds quite vague and maybe not super straightforward, but really it kind of is. As soon as you start to actually dedicate some of your time and appreciate the importance that matter has during product development. When you truly understand how important it is, you prioritize it, and you start to focus on it more, and you dedicate yourself, and you start to see returns on it. And that's pretty much the main thing that I wanted to pass to the audience here, is that it's never enough to just stay at a certain place, setting up quantitative analytics and product analytics and stuff like that, and then just sticking with that. You have to go beyond that, always evolving, because the market is evolving. There are people out there that are constantly, trying to improve their product, find new processes and methods. And if you're not doing that, you're falling behind. And if you're falling behind, that's not usually a good thing to happen in any market. This is the last slide. Basically, it's kind of redundant. It just shows some of the important features you have to look out for, some of the important techniques and factors you have to look out for when you set up, a qualitative study framework and start to obtain qualitative information. The most important here, I would say, is three things. The first is actually doing very good due diligence on the participants that somebody is providing you for qualitative studies. If you're using your own users for such studies, that's fine. That's great. That's the best thing there is. If you're using third party, always be super vigilant on who the participants are. A lot of those platforms, they really lie, and they don't lie because they want to. They lie because it's super hard to understand who a particular user is at a certain point of time. There are people who cheat the system. They use VPNs and stuff like that. So you might end up spending a lot of time and money and effort in a study on an audience which appears to be yours, but actually is a completely irrelevant audience. Another thing is, I would suggest doing unmoderated studies, not moderated, because moderated provides you the ability to actually see how the user performs without personal guidance in an app or a product or whatever, interacting with it just as he would with in daily life. And a screen and video recording is really good to capture that. So you would ideally like to set up a system where you would have a participant from your target audience use your application for an hour or so, or maybe if it's a diary study for several days, and provide you a screen recording of himself using it with voiceover recording. So like if he has any emotions or opinions about a certain thing, or he's surprised, like if he would voice them, and if you would tell him to voice his feelings and emotions and provide the recording as well at the same time, this is like super helpful. This is the universally, like what we found from my experience, what I found is screen recordings of devices or computers with voiceovers are the most helpful to designers and producers to create a great product. And also survey questions at the end. All right.
Yeah, sorry, I just have to interrupt you now because we've just gone a bit over time. But thank you very much, Kristian. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was really interesting.